Okay, welcome colleagues. As you're coming into the room, we will wait a few minutes for others to join. Welcome, colleagues. I hope you are finding yourself in the right room. We are here in room 1, data for driving sustainable and resilient human settlements. We will just give it about 1 more minute to make sure everyone joins. We are now in a much smaller group, so I just want to remind you to feel free to be more interactive, use the chat more, and hopefully you'll feel more confident in a smaller group. Lovely to see some familiar faces. Hi, Lone. Hi, others. Welcome. Okay, I see most of our panelists are here. So I think we should kick off because we don't have that much time and we have quite a jam-packed session to get through. So hoping others find us in the right place and can jump on when they're able to. So this session is really about understanding that access to current and accurate data is fundamental for the development of sustainable and resilient settlements in cities, and particularly in the context of informality, such as informal settlements, but also the densification of township areas and a thriving informal housing market. Cities really need to be working with data that reflects the very specific local and spatial realities, the demand, the supply, and the scale of the need. The new urban agenda really emphasizes the need for local level data on human settlement patterns so that we can make decision-making that is informed and evidence-based. And I think particularly in the context of the very imminent climate crisis, data on settlements is critical for disaster risk reduction and reducing cities' carbon footprint, but also mitigating against the negative effects of climate change. So cities' investment in data and spatial mapping can almost then be seen as an action for growth and recovery in itself to ensure that cities are developed to be resilient and sustainable. And as we heard from the introduction earlier, we're very blessed in this country to have a number of organizations that are contributing to a very complex data landscape that together can paint an accurate picture of a context that's complex and that's continuously changing and evolving. And there are many data solutions that are available to cities to use for their decision-making and for their prioritization. So in the session, we will hear from NGOs, but we'll also hear from international agencies and academic institutions to understand how the sector is constantly innovating in how it collects, aggregates, and visualizes to ultimately share its data. So we'll be focusing today on the importance of data and spatialized mapping by looking at different aspects of human settlements and what data solutions do already exist. So we'll be looking at themes such as land and property rights, the informal rental sector, participatory planning, greening, densification, as well as indicator tracking. So I just want to check that all of our esteemed panelists are here. I see they are. Welcome everyone, and you're welcome to turn on your cameras. You can even keep them on if you want to. This breakout room is intended to be slightly less formal than the plenary, so I hope we can also generate some good discussion, honest conversation. This is a safe space. You know, you're welcome to share your critiques, your criticism. It's really a space for generative conversation. So just a little overview of what we will be doing. So after this brief introduction, we will be hearing from our 5 very esteemed, inspiring panelists. And if each of them are able to stick to their 10-minute allocation, then we will be able to have a nice, robust Q&A with the audience. And we'll then close the session. So panelists, to help you stick to time, I will turn on my camera and put the spotlight back on me when you have 1 minute left to wrap up. So without further ado, I am going to be introducing the first panelist, and just a final reminder to please do use the chat. Use Q&A. We really want to get participation flowing. As mentioned by Sipe, the session was meant to be moderated by the DDG, who is also a doctor, Nana Mhlongo. She is DDG of Research, Policy, Strategy and Planning in the Department of Human Settlements, and quite an expert on this topic. She's also a friend and a partner of the Inclusive Cities program at SACN and has been a big support of our work. So we were very excited to have her, and I see she is going to be listening in on the call, but I know she's also dealing with a crisis in the background. So thank you, DDG, just for being here. So I will move on to introducing our first speaker, who is going to be speaking about, in general, why is data important for sustainable and resilient human settlements? And there's no one better to do this than a representative from the GCRO, the Gauteng City Region Observatory, Dr. Laven Naidoo, who is a senior researcher at the GCRO. He has a PhD in geoinformatics. He's a very esteemed Y-rated scientist. He's also been appointed as an NRF rating specialist committee member, as well as holding an extraordinary lecturer position at the University of Pretoria. So he has a very strong data background, and we know that the GCRO has been really leading the way in terms of creating continuous spatialized mapping for the Gauteng city region. And Dr. Naidoo will be demonstrating the importance of data for sustainable and resilient human settlements by sharing the work of the GCRO as a critical source of data that cities should be using for their decision making. And hopefully we'll draw on some of the wonderful platforms such as the Quality of Life Survey, and other important platforms that the GCRO generates continuously over all these years. And without further ado, Dr. Naidoo, if you are ready to go, I will hand over to you.
Thanks a lot, Kayla. Can I share the screen from my side? Hi, colleagues. Everybody else, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let me just put in presenter mode. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Laven Naidoo. I'm actually from the Gauteng City Region Observatory. I'm a senior researcher there. And my focus on this presentation will be on the importance of data for sustainable resilience in human settlements with a special relevance to this Gauteng City Region, which is basically the Gauteng province. And these are a number of colleagues who have assisted in this presentation. I would like to thank. And without further ado, I'll just quickly demonstrate what is the Gauteng City Regional Observatory, or the GCRO. We are a very privileged university or organization which was created through the institutional collaboration between a multitude of universities within the Gauteng area. And that's University of Johannesburg, University of Witwatersrand, as well as other organizations such as the Gauteng provincial government, as well as the local organized government within Gauteng. The main purpose of this organization is for the purpose of policy-oriented research. So we focus mainly in medium to long-term applied research, as well as provide support work for policy development, as well as on-call requests from the Office of the Premier and so forth. But our main core is actually developing academic research, which is independent in all forms of spheres of government, irrespective of party or affiliation. So the main importance, or the actual reason why we're focusing on the Gauteng City region, is because it's actually the biggest, most densely populated area within Gauteng, within South Africa in general. And that's looking at the figure on the right, which is our Gauteng City region, which is basically defined as the province of Gauteng, as well as a few satellite areas along the periphery. And that separates the very concentrated and dynamic urban core, and from the very complex as well as sparse urban periphery as well. So the importance of data, especially, is particularly crucial in this heterogeneous environment, especially for the unpacking of various trends within the various challenges which faces these various cities within the Gauteng City region, as well as to provide some sort of quantitative metric for appropriate decision-making at a variety of suitable scales. So I'm just going to go through a combination of some of these particular issues within the Gauteng City region, which we are currently in a state of what is known as a polycrisis, which means there's a variety of different crises all hitting the city at the same time. These include population growth, which is currently sitting at 15.1 million and expected to grow even further, even despite the impact of COVID, as well as despite reduction or in a projection of the population within the period of time. Our correlation with census data in the bottom corner of the slide indicates that there is a forward projection growth up to 17 million people in 2030. And that's one of the reports that we actually published, and it's available online as well. In terms of this increase in population, what we're seeing is that this population growth is distributed very densely within the existing urban core, as well as through other contexts such as urban sprawl. So we're looking at two particular phenomena here: the urban sprawl along the periphery and a specific densification through backyard shack dwellings. And we're seeing a very prominent increase in terms of population density, also derived from the most current census data sets, where we're seeing an upward projection of close to 1,000 people per meter squared in some instance. Per kilometer
Dr. Naidoo, apologies
yes,
to interrupt. The slides
no
are not moving, so I think if you could just stop sharing and reshare,
okay, sure.
that might do it.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No problem, Kayla. Is it stuck at the growth and change in Gauteng? Is it that slide?
We're still on the first slide, the cover of the presentation.
Okay. All right, I see it. I've moved quite a bit and it hasn't. Okay, let me try again. Apologies for that, colleagues.
It's quite a common error, so don't worry about that.
No problem.
I don't know why it sometimes does that. But if you can just kick off where you had finished.
Can you see the presentation, Kayla, from your side?
It's still on the cover slide. I think
Okay.
maybe stop sharing and then reshare. Yeah.
Try to share again. Okay, Kayla, can you see my screen?
Yes, let's see if they move now.
So let's have a check on that. Okay. Are you seeing it? Change the slides?
Yay. Okay. Excellent.
Oh, okay,
Well done.
great.
Thank you.
Apologies. Okay, apologies, colleagues, for that technical glitch. So this, just to recap through the slide very quickly, that's the Gauteng City region. I explained the concept of the GCRO, Gauteng City Region Observatory, and our focus on both policy work as well as scientific research as well, within the context of this very dynamic environment. And the reason why data is particularly so important is due to the polycrises that we're actually facing. Population growth is a very considerable challenge which we're facing, which is a very small land surface area that's increasing consistently in terms of population size. Currently, according to the census data, we're sitting at 15.1 million people, and that growth is expected to increase continuously up to 17.5 million by 2030. And this particular increase in population, as I said, is found within the growth within the peripheries, as well as within the urban core, through backyard chuck dwellings, as well as urban sprawl towards the periphery. And we're seeing that particular increase in population density, and with the projected values of being close to 1,000 people per kilometer squared, also being observed by 2030, according to our projections. Other issues within the polycrises include water security. We are currently sitting within a process where Rand Water, which is our big service provider in terms of water supply, about up to 83% of the water supply is being provided by Rand Water, but we're sitting at the maximum limits of our extraction limit, which means we can't extract any more water. So the preservation of water is particularly important, especially within the context of a day zero, which a lot of our provinces has faced within the context of the last 10 years or so. Unfortunately, a lot of the individuals within Gauteng are not seeing much of an interest or much of an issue of running out of water. A lot of our surveys which we conduct are showing a large decrease in terms of the number of people who agree to the fact that we'll be running out of water. Compounded within the water issue or water shortages issues which we're facing within the city is obviously within the context of load shedding, which is facing the national issue within the country, where we're seeing a large number of rolling blackouts, which affects both the economy as well as the water issue, which we were talking about earlier, which as a result of a lot of the pumps are dependent on the access of electricity to run these pumps. So you get a coupled issue of both lack of lights as well of electricity and power, as well as lack of water as well. So the GCRO have come together to create a variety of specific projects, which we think creates a lot of, or utilizes existing data sets, which can speak to addressing various aspects of not only the polycrises, which I said earlier, but within the context of driving a very resilient as well as sustainable city. So this is just some of the work that we're actually producing within the Gauteng City region. The first particular project is dealing at the creation of what is known as a carbon atlas. Within the sustainable field in terms of climate change and understanding our emissions as well as carbon sinks, we need to understand various prerogatives within the governmental institutions, such as the desire to be carbon neutral. So in order to understand the issue of being carbon neutral, we need to actually quantify where our different sources of carbon as well as our sinks of carbon, i.e. where the carbon is actually stored within vegetation as well as organic matter, and where our emissions are at as well at the regional and internet and national level as well. So this particular figure is looking at green carbon, which we created over the Gauteng City region, which is the largest carbon sink within the various variations of carbon. And that's basically carbon stored in trees and grasses. You can see the variation across the Gauteng province. And we can see how it's split up into different municipalities as well, and different vegetation and structural parameters as well. And what we are seeing is that a lot of the periphery consists of a lot of grasses, well, a lot of the trees, which hold the greatest amount of carbon is stored within a lot of these old historic areas, such as the northern suburbs, as well as more greenery areas such as Magaliesburg and so forth. And what we're also finding is that a large portion of this green carbon is actually in unprotected areas as well. So they are at risk of being proliferated for other uses, reducing our carbon sink as well, carbon stocks. Another aspect of the coin is looking at carbon emissions, which is an ongoing project, and that we can use to kind of ascertain where we're sitting within the carbon spectrum. Other issues within the Gauteng City region is kind of looking for very high resolution economic data. And this is a big problem within very highly densified and economic hubs, such as the city of Johannesburg, where a lot of this economic data is located at the planning region level and not specifically to very high resolutions. And also the actual data set is limited in terms of temporal, within the temporal ranges as well. So this particular project makes use of very novel data sets, such as night light intensity data sets, which is acquired from satellite imagery, although taken at night is being used as a proxy for daytime activity. And we're correlating these particular data sets within a machine learning environment, in this case, a random forest environment, which we can use to correlate that to create a model to predict gross value added, or GVA, across the city of Johannesburg in this particular case. This particular model that we created was applied for basically from 2012, 2016, and then we kind of forward projected that model to 2019 and 2021 to see the impacts of basically the issues of COVID as well as load shedding on the actual economy, which is seen in the bottom right-hand corner over here, which is actually the difference map between 2021 and 2012. Seeing areas of truncation within the economy as well as areas of very minimal growth in certain localities as well. Other aspects is actually understanding quantitatively the housing inequality as well as crowding within the Gauteng City region. And this involves deriving a metric known as the building volume per capita metric, which takes a building volume layer derived from radar data sets, which we obtained from the German aerospace agencies, and we divided that by our highest resolution population data, which is our hexagon data set layer, which we obtained from GTI, which is a private institution. We divided that to get a particular metric, which is the building volume per person, which is basically the amount of space available per person within a particular unit of measure, in this case, the hexagons. We mapped that spatially, and what we're finding a very interesting picture where these areas in peach over here are areas such as informal areas like Alex and Mpuve and Soweto, where people are living up 10 meters cubed of actual space, which actually gives you an indication of the level of congestedness and overcrowding in these particular areas. While areas in the northern hemisphere or northern suburbs are seeing spaces greater than 1,000 meters cubed per person, which is a very lavish and very open space for those particular individuals. And what we're actually seeing, also integrating that data set with other information, such as the annual income per group, as well as the total number of housing within these particular groups, we're finding that people living in with very marginalized income groups in the Gauteng City region actually live in the most densest conditions and have the least amount of space available to them as well, which actually compounds the level of inequality within the Gauteng City region. Okay. A final project I would like, okay, one minute, thanks a lot, Kayla. In terms of the understanding the spread of the possible pathogen X, we're looking at using the integration of sewer water measurements as well as incidence levels of COVID and integrating that with various socioeconomic parameters to understand the distribution of COVID and whether we can actually use that to forward project this issue of pathogen X as well, which is a future problem looking forward to into the future. And we're seeing very good alignment between socioeconomic variables and what we're actually noticing in terms of the concentration of the viral load in the sewer water, as well as incidence levels across taken by the national government. And finally, just to wrap up, we're looking into our understanding of quality of life, a survey which we conduct every few years or so. Since our inception, since 2009, we actually have done 7 quality of life surveys. We're currently doing our 7th one, and that's looking at various socioeconomic metrics which we're asking through various in-face interviews of survey questions related to the living conditions, economic circumstances, and opinions of the different citizens in Johannesburg, and mapping them spatially as well as analytically and quantitatively. So this particular data set is available already online through a Data First, which is basically a data repository at UCT, and five as well as 6 variables with our, which can actually map spatially the distribution of these different aspects, like the percentage of people feel safe with the Gauteng, as well as looking at it within bar graph format and changes between our qual 5 and qual 6 years, which is basically a 6-year difference in time frame. And finally, I would like to conclude and thank the individuals listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I just want to point out the different surveys that we actually have, different subscription newsletters in which you'll get, also available here, as well as our different catalogs. A lot of this information is already packaged in that particular catalog as well. So thanks again, Kayla, and thanks again for the opportunity to present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naidoo. What a wonderful way to start. I think in the context of this concept of the polycrisis, the variety of crises hitting cities simultaneously, you've really demonstrated just how important data is to wrap our heads around these very overwhelming crises and begin to understand the scale and also the speed that these changes are taking place. So thank you so much, Dr. Naidoo. So I think we've started with a nice broad picture of what high-level data is available to us or still going to be available. And we're now going to zoom into the very local level to hear about community-driven data for participatory planning and service delivery. And we'll be hearing from Tracy Jooste from the International Budget Partnership. She's the head of the special programs there, and she's really been working alongside grassroots organizations to advocate for dignified access to services in informal settlements. And she's also established a pioneering initiative advocating for gender-responsive procurement, as well as female-friendly basic services, which is such an important and overlooked aspect of service delivery. And she's also leading the Asivikelane health campaign, and it's really the work of Asivikelane, a project that I'm sure we've all heard of, that we want to hear about today a little bit more in some more detail. So we are absolutely thrilled that Tracy is joining us all the way from the US. So Tracy, if you can share your screen, I will let you start.
Thanks so much, Kayla, and thanks colleagues for taking time to be here today. Let me just put this on full screen. Okay, I'm going to dive right in. So just in terms of the structure of the presentation, I'm just going to give a brief overview and introduction to what Asivikelane is, tell you a little bit about the campaign, tell you a bit more about who is involved in the campaign. I'll touch on some of the impacts and influence that has been achieved with this campaign, speak to the success factors, which we think have really been able to help us achieve some of those impacts with Asivikelane. I'll talk about some of the persistent challenges and then touch on what we think cities can do to address those challenges. Kayla, will you just confirm that the slide has moved on?
Yes, it has. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, excuse me, what is Asivikelane? So essentially, this is a national campaign with the primary goal of amplifying the voices of informal settlement residents across the country and supporting them to advocate for better services. I don't think we can underscore enough the magnitude of the challenges facing communities who are living in informal settlements. In some of our cities, about 20% of the population is living in an informal settlement. And this Asivikelane campaign covers 8 of the metros and 2 local municipalities. And in terms of how we work to amplify the voices of residents, every second month, we essentially conduct a community survey. We, at this point, at our last round of data collection, we spoke to over 4,500 residents. And really the objective is to have a deep understanding about the access to basic services. Was there enough water available for themselves and their community in the last week? Or do they have access to toilets? Are the toilets being cleaned by the municipality? Is the waste being collected? How are clinic services operating? Are they ensuring that waiting times are short, etc. So this gives us a really nuanced understanding of how residents are experiencing basic services. And this experiential data has really enabled us to achieve three important things. The first thing is that through this mechanism, residents are able to identify their service delivery priorities. This information then feeds into engagements, which we help them facilitate between residents and government officials to solve some of the very urgent and pressing service delivery problems. So a lot of the emphasis is on the implementation side. Government and communities working together to address gaps in services, bring in new services, fix and repair broken taps and toilets, etc. But we're also focusing on the long-term sustainability of service delivery and really advocating for government to be more inclusive at the onset of any planning and budgeting, and then to ensure that the budgets themselves are sufficient and strategically allocated specifically to address the needs of informal settlements across the country. Just in terms of one of the ways we present the data, on the right-hand side, you'll see the table with the most recent data we collected across the metros, where we asked residents whether their solid waste was collected in the last 7 days. That's a percentage of residents who said yes. So you'll see the greens are those that are doing better, the reds are performing really poorly. And this information is really critical because we would then engage places like Mangaung and Tshwane to understand exactly how the lack of that service has impacted communities, but then also understand the problem. Why is waste not being collected? How can we work with government to unlock the service delivery challenge in those spaces? In terms of who's involved, the residents themselves are the most important pillar of this campaign. We started in 2020 with Asivikelane with a couple of hundred residents providing us with their data and sharing their experience. We collect quantitative and qualitative insights from residents. The campaign has grown to include almost 5,000 residents who live across 374 informal settlements across the metros and 2 local municipalities. The majority of the participants and activists in the campaign are female. And this was a really important finding early on. Excuse me, when we started doing a gender disaggregated analysis of the data, we really got a nuanced understanding of how basic services, the lack thereof in particular, disproportionately impacts women. And so that became a really central part of the campaign, is advocating for services which focus on protecting the safety and health and hygiene of women. Organizationally, the campaign is led by IBP South Africa and our 12 grassroots and CSO partners across the country. We would not be able to have the kind of reach and scale that we have if it were not for our partners. Many of them have been with us since the beginning of the campaign, but we've also grown significantly over the last 3 years. And then the campaign essentially is a collective effort. We do see all 3 spheres of government as part of Asivikelane. That's where we want to see the change. So building partnerships with government is absolutely central. We also work really closely with key accountability partners like the Auditor General of South Africa. And that's really to find different points of influence, and so also give municipalities some guidance and assurance that some of the things we're advocating for, like inclusion in budget processes, etc., does align with the overall objectives of the AG. We know that's a big concern for municipalities. And then we have many other allies who are part of the campaign, including donors, big donors. We've got some individuals who have contributed to the campaign as well. And on the right-hand side, there's just some quotes from the residents about what Asivikelane has meant to them and what it's enabled them to do to actively to bring improved services in their communities. So this collective action has really demonstrated the power of community-driven data collection and advocacy to bring change. since the campaign started, and it was really catalyzed as an emergency response to COVID-19. It's grown significantly, and it's had a huge impact. We estimate that the delivery of new services and repairs to existing services has impacted over 4 million residents living in informal settlements across the country, across those 3 services. And essentially what this has done has brought safer and healthier access to many communities across our cities. Some examples of what that means is that toilets are being cleaned more frequently. Most communities are served by communal toilets. Residents have had a say in some cases in the location of services, which has been really critical to ensuring that taps and toilets are put in places that are safer, good lighting, good surveillance, etc. We've seen improvements in the supply of clean water, even improvements in water pressure, for example, as a result of community advocacy. Fault reporting systems have improved in some metros. Some metros have relied significantly on the data collected from Asivikelane to determine where the faults are. And we've had some quicker responses to repairs to services in some cases. In addition to these implementation and delivery impacts, the campaign has also had an influence at a systems level. We submit inputs into all the city budgets every year, and we've seen over time the cities have actually increased their budget allocation to informal settlement. We do believe that our ongoing advocacy and community inputs into the budgets has been part of the reason for the shifts in the metro budgets. But we've also had a direct impact in terms of the tender specifications for communal services in some metros. Many cities and municipalities continue to procure chemical toilets, for example, as the primary form of sanitation in informal settlements. And so in Tshwane and eThekwini, through engaging communities, they were able to ensure that those chemical toilets are safer, that simple things like locks on doors are plainly inaccessible to persons with disabilities, etc. And those impacts have had those changes have had a huge impact on residents' safety and access. In the Western Cape, we're really excited about a current development with working with the province to develop a policy guideline for the provision of gender-responsive basic services. In terms of what we think the success factors are, yes, data is a powerful resource. It paints a really important picture about what's happening, but the consistency of the data collection is also powerful because it means that we are listening to residents on a continuous basis, and government is listening to residents on a continuous basis. And we really do pay attention to what is coming from residents. So issues around safety, for example, for women and children came through really strongly from our conversations with residents. And that's been really instrumental in helping us focus the campaign on women's needs, on what it means to consider the health and safety of women and girls and children in particular. Then we also are extremely persistent in our government engagement and advocacy and our communication. We call it Press the Power. It's really important for the campaign to be visible and to maintain continuous engagement with government officials. Over time, we've also seen that government does view this data as valuable and credible. In some cases, the Asivikelane data is more accurate and up-to-date than what the municipalities have themselves. And because it comes from residents themselves, it gives it credibility. And this has helped us to build trust over time. And essentially, this feeds into our overall goal, which is to really focus on building long-term partnerships and relationships with government. So it's really not just about once-off interventions and responses. We really do want to shift the culture of the way government works with residents and the way policies and plans and budgets are determined. Despite the success of the campaign,
can we wrap up there? I hate to do this. If you're able to wrap up in 30 seconds.
Sorry, Kayla. Apologies, Kayla.
About that.
Despite this, many challenges do persist across the cities: continuous under-budgeting of services, a lack of inclusion and transparency, and this has led to, in many cases, continuous insufficient quantity and quality of services to informal settlements. In terms of what we think cities can do, really this presentation is in some ways an invitation to cities and other stakeholders to speak to communities, speak to residents. Asivikelane is a vehicle for doing that. There are ways to be much more intentional about inclusion and prioritizing women, and also to be transparent in the way budgets and planning and procurement processes are delivered. And on the right-hand side is just a very short story from one of our residents and our community facilitators in Knysna, Moteane, who is standing in front of gender-separated chemical toilets, which the residents decided on the location, and they decided it would be safer to have separate toilets for women, and negotiated that with the councillor, and they've reported that that's had an impact on the health and safety. So thank you so much, and thanks for being with me on the time, and yes, please engage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I really hate to cut off that kind of a presentation. I'm glad you got to your final slide because the work is so, so important. So thank you so much for making time. And I know it's still early in the morning there for you. So we really, really appreciate it. I think the work just shows such an important link between data and impact and data and advocacy, which is often a missing link. So we're not just generating data for the sake of it, but we're able to really translate it into action. And yeah, just wonderful to be able to have your voice in this panel. We'll move to our third speaker, and I'll stop with introductions for the sake of time. Monyake Moteane, welcome, urban specialist from the World Bank. You'll be speaking about data for sustainable settlements, focusing on sustainable, how we can make our settlements more resilient to climate risk. So again, we'll be zooming out a little bit, and we'll do a lot of that throughout this session, kind of zooming into the very local level, zooming out again, just to show the variety and the richness of data that does exist. So Monyake, I see you are all ready to go. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Kayla. Can I just confirm that you can see my screen, which has just been shared now?
We can. And do you want to just test if we can see the next slide as well?
Is it moving?
No, it's not moving yet. Not for me.
Please let me just quickly do this. If you don't mind, I'll just start it afresh.
No problem.
All right. I'm hoping you can still see the slide. Let me just check if it's moving.
Not moving. You might have to do what Dr. Naidoo had to do, which is just to stop sharing and then reshare.
Can you see it now? It's not in presentation mode, but I just want to check if you can see it.
Not moving. We're still seeing the front slide, the cover slide.
Terribly strange now. Okay, can you see it moving without it being
Yes, we can. So don't worry about putting it in presentation. You'll be forgiven.
Okay,
we can.
Okay, no, that's
thank
fine.
you.
So in the interest of time, let me just move on. Thank you, Kayla, and thank you to the fellow panelists. Thank you to all the attendees. My name is Monyake Moteane. I'm an urban specialist with the World Bank based in our Pretoria office. So colleagues, what I'm going to do today is just quickly reflect on a study which we recently completed on urban heat in Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, and then reflect on some of the key findings. And hopefully in doing so, we can start to talk about the nexus between the themes that were put forward for this session, which is around resilience, around community-driven data, around looking at built environment, around looking at informal settlements. So just to kickstart, I mean, so the focus here is really on urban heat, but I mean, I'll demonstrate how we're able to work with the community just to look at the impact of extreme heat. We know that empirical data is just indicating to us that global temperatures are on the rise. There's present overwhelming evidence that's suggesting this, from the melting glaciers to melting ice sheets to rising sea levels. But I think more significantly, I think temperatures are on the rise. And what's even significant on this slide is just to indicate that I think the top 10 recorded heat years were actually done post the 1980s. And I think what's significant is that within cities, this is happening twice as fast, simply because of the choice of materials that we use, simply between the kind of urban design that we employ in cities. And this is having an impact on things such as, subsectors like health, labor, productivity, transportation, energy, etc. So again, in the built environment, depending on the choice of the urban materials that we utilize, we can either absorb or radiate the sun's energy. I think what you see here on the left is like a contrast between more hard surfaces, which we use in the urban environment, versus more permeable materials, which have a different impact in terms of how they start to interact with heat. So what we did as the World Bank is that we actually did urban heat study in both Ekurhuleni as well as Johannesburg, seeing how they're just so close to each other. We worked with 100 community members, and then we conducted readings or an urban heat campaign within 6 neighborhoods in both the metros. And then the readings were then utilized as a basis for climate modeling up till 2015, just to get a sense of what the environment might look like. And then we used an urban climate model, and our partners there were Vito. They were based in Brussels, and then our local partner here was Plan Act, who worked with us to help us mobilize the communities. And then this is what we found in terms of present and future heat stresses, and we're able to generate both these data sets for both the metros. So this is data sets that the metros can then utilize for a range of planning and decision-making exercises. So what we found is that within metros where you've got densely packed buildings and no trees, you could face up to 6 degrees higher temperatures than your cooler rural counterparts. And then if you take just a cutout out of one of the areas that we sampled, that's Tembisa, and then to the far east is a rural reference point. So we found that that was 6 degrees cooler than Tembisa, which is more densely packed, as well as which has less greenery. So we thought that was quite interesting. And then we also saw that even at a micro scale, neighborhoods themselves are facing sharp disparities in terms of heat. So if you look at an informal settlement with corrugated iron structures versus a more formal medium to high density environment, just adjacent to it as well. I mean, even the experiences of heat are quite diverse. And then by doing just a modeling exercise, we found that okay, so the situation in the present situation is that we have about 20 hot days. But then when you model this to 2050 under different climate change, under different heat scenarios, we found that we could get from 20, we could get to about 80 to 100, to 120, which is probably 4 to 5 times much hotter nights than we are currently experiencing. And this has an impact on health, because if your body is unable to cool down, you're unable to relax, and then you're unable to also, it affects your labor productivity as well. And what we did was we used something called an WBGT, which is a wet bulb globe temperature sensor. And this is different from a normal heat sensor in the sense that it doesn't just look at air temperature, but it looks at a range of factors like radiation and humidity. And that gives you a much more accurate lived experience of heat versus just one metric. And then it's able to give you different readings, and then it's able to tell you from when you have no heat stress to when you have extreme heat stress, and then, some of the safety considerations that one has to make. And then again, through modeling, we looked at some of the neighborhoods. These are just some sample neighborhoods that we looked at, and we found that in a 2050 scenario, and then this was based on one day that we used in 2016, which was a heat stress day. We found that when we take when we simulate this to the future in 2050, a lot more of the micro geographies of these neighborhoods are going to be in the much higher moderate to extreme heat categories. So there will be less of the no heat stress categories. And we thought that was quite alarming and very useful for practitioners to be aware of. Similarly, this just was a much more extreme case. It demonstrates pretty much what I've just indicated. So then we try to also figure out who then is affected by this. Okay, so yes, enough 4 minutes. We try to figure out who then is affected. So what we did was the first quadrant of this slide just indicates, where we've got the most extreme heat stress within the 2 metros. And then we found that heat stress actually has a greening element. So it's almost an inverse of the first map. Where you've got less greenery, you're likely to experience more heat stress. And where you've also got in the bottom left quadrant, where you've got low-income residents, you're likely to have more heat stress. And then similarly striking was that where you've got it also has like it's also got excuse me, I just can't see my slides properly. Yeah, so sorry about that. So similarly, what we found was that in neighborhoods where you've got more colored and black population groups, there was more heat stress there. So these factors actually quite correlate to each other. So what one can do is through the interventions such as, vegetations and cool buildings, we know that we can mitigate excessive heat. And then if you use very good materials, you can lower the temperature by more than 10 degrees. Let me just jump through this fairly quickly. Just to expand more on the greening element, we found that just by contrasting similar neighborhoods that are contiguous to each other, you find that in township areas, you've got less than 15% tree cover, and then in more prosperous suburbs, you've got more than 60%. This is likely to cause, to show the disproportionate effect of how heat is felt across these neighborhoods. And then we modeled this for a number of neighborhoods. We did it for Sentin and we did for Alex and Athol. We did it for some parts of Hillbrow, Houghton. We did it in Ekurhuleni. We did it in Tshwane, where we're demonstrating the effects between Mamelodi as well as Waterkloof. And then the effects were the impact was the same. In township areas, you've got less greenery, and then in more prosperous townships, you've got more greenery. And then we also found that the utilization of construction materials also has an impact on how heat is felt. If you've got a corrugated iron structure, you're likely to experience an 8 degree increase in heat versus if you've got much nicer construction material in a township like in a suburb like Parktown North, as an example. Just quickly, the sectoral impact, and I'll go through this fairly quickly. We know that extreme heat can lead to things like rail buckling, softening of asphalt, and then it can also lead to increase in transformers overheating. For a country that's grappling with a power supply crisis, this is quite important. And those data sets, what you can start to do with them is that you can start to overlay certain elements, like this is the railway line for the whole 2 metros. And then through doing this, you can start to see where you're likely to have an impact. And then just some of the recommended actions. I'll go through this really quickly, Kayla. With people, what you can start to do is, you can set targets for the number of trees. And one thing that I just want to emphasize with this intervention is that, of course, it's very important that through your planning exercise, you identify the kind of species that you want to have, so that you don't use trees that are to the detriment of your water security as well. And then you can have a cool roof program, and this is an intervention that you can apply to the built environment. You can also apply this to informal settlement, to township areas. And then you can start to protect places where people gather, at places like taxi stops and train stations. And then with regards to, I'll go through more the people interventions. So those are the places. With people, you can start to have early warning systems for imminent heat stresses. And what you can start to do is you can also start to have community cool spaces, and then try to promote energy sources like solar, in order to present more renewable energy sources as a source for community cooling. And then you can also start to protect workers that are under duress. I mean, they work workers that are in occupations such as waste picking, construction, as well as road maintenance. And then ultimately, I think the biggest takeaway is that you can start to mainstream, how you deal with heat across different departments and different departmental plans. So that's an important thing. And then you can start to have things like city heat officers, and then they can double up as other resources within the metro as well. So these are just some of the examples. And then just to conclude, we said that you can start to have a heat wave risk management cycle. And with this, when you have an imminent heat stress, you can raise awareness. During a heat stress, you can start to protect your vulnerable groups, which is the older, people with underlying issues, the young people. And then after the heat wave, you can review. And then, but more importantly, I think you can start to have, you can start to strengthen more your preparedness, because we know that it's a lot simpler to deal with preparedness versus taking interventions once the heat wave has struck. So in conclusion, that sums up, I think, what I had to present today. Thank you. And I couldn't see the slides, so apologies. I couldn't see some of the text. Thank you.
Thank you, Monyake. No, you did brilliantly, and I'm astounded you got through 43 slides in 10 minutes. Well done. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's such important data. I think urban heat is going to increasingly become a major factor in the health and the well-being of all urban residents, and especially for the most vulnerable settlements, as you've so clearly demonstrated, where there's a lack of trees, dense building construction, using materials like metal. We really need to be paying attention to the microclimates of our settlements and the socio-economic dimensions of that microclimate. So thank you so much. We'll move on now quickly to our fourth speaker, Kamogelo Shika from the Development Action Group, DAG. She's a project coordinator, and her work focuses on the Contractor and Developer Academy, as well as the Backyard Matters project. I saw her presenting recently at a conference and was incredibly excited by the very interesting data work that they are doing. So Kamogelo, if you are ready, please share your presentation. Let's see if these slides are also going to stick or if they will be smooth flowing. So if you can share, there we go.
Kayla, let's test if it moves. No, let me just. Okay. No, it's not moving. Wait, is it moving?
Yeah, I think don't worry about putting it into presentation mode. If you can just share it like that, that's perfect. There's something funny going on.
Okay, but you can all see, right?
We can. Thank you, Kamo.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Kayla, and thank you for inviting us as DAG. So I'll be presenting about collecting and analyzing data in the informal settings. So I'll be giving an example in the work that we do in Cape Town. So I think firstly, just to highlight where I come from. So I work for DAG. So DAG is Development Action Group, which is an NGO that is based in Western Cape. So it's been there since 1986. This is where it started because of forced removals that happened in Crossroad. And just ever since, DAG has continued to work and strengthen its focus in affordable rental housing, where we work in the inner city and also in historically disadvantaged areas. And this is where we also capacitate your emerging contractors and also working with developers. This is where I'll be just zooming in. And just to highlight that within DAG, we have different projects. So this is where we have Contractor and Developer Academy, where you'll see in the next slide. So this is the work that we do with the emerging contractors and also the developers. So just to highlight a few of the services that are shared in the Contractor and Developer Academy here. It's conducting information sessions and also like tailor-making trainings for those developers and the contractors. So for someone who say, I want to build rental units, we'll do some project packaging. We also have like a database of built environment professionals for someone who's looking for an architect. And then also for the purpose of today, we also have a service where we do data management and analyzing. And this is where we draw data from Facebook. And then lastly, as the CDA, we do something that we call sector coordination. This is where we bring in different stakeholders that work around enabling, creating enabling environment for the developers to build rental units at scale. I think I've already started speaking about developers, but just a bit of background to highlight who these individuals are. As you can see on this slide, it's just showcasing the spectrum of developers. So this is where we have someone who is called an incremental homeowner developer or a debt finance developer. So this is where these are individuals that only like build in the existing like rental in the existing property, this is where they would build to just supplement their incomes. And then you also have someone who's called micro developers. So these are individuals that build up to scale. So this is where from your 6 units up to even 20 units, this is where they would buy like a piece of land. Usually it will be like an RDP and they demolish it and build those 20 rental units. And just to highlight that this sector is recognized as a key feature in addressing the housing crisis that we face in our South African cities. And also just lack of data around this work just also highlights how, in terms of government response, there's a bit of I would say slow pace in terms of responding to the challenges that are faced by these developers, and due to the lack of data that is there for them to better understand it. And this is where the work around DEG in terms of data management then comes in. So this is where in the next slide, I'll highlight just the work that we are doing in terms of understanding the demand and supply side of this rental sector. So before I can kickstart into that work, just to highlight even why we do the work, I think initially I highlighted the issue around lack of data. So just to get a greater understanding of the rental market in how it provides like affordable accommodation, and also for the users, for the landlords to use it in terms of them just setting fair rental prices when it comes to maybe even them doing a feasibility study before they could even develop, just to better understand what is feasible in that neighborhood. And also for the tenants themselves to use the data to also better understand which neighborhoods offer like what rental amount, so that it might be affordable for them. And then lastly, also just to use it as a lobbying tool for us to engage with government, for example, how the data might show that there's some neighborhoods that maybe require some infrastructure retrofit programs, and this is where we use that tool for us to engage with the different spheres of government. So this is where it all started in 2019. This is where the team created a Facebook page where we were just thinking around how it could be a platform that connects seekers and those who are offering affordable rentals. And currently at the moment, we have over 60,000 members on that Facebook group. And just to highlight in terms of the like gender distribution that's split, we have like majority 65 females and then 35 females, over like 21,000 males. And just to highlight that it's not only used by tenants and landlords, but the group is also used by property managers and also your real estate agents that will also like usually post in the group. And I think this slide is just showcasing example of what a post might look like. So this is where you'd see like a landlord offering rooms in Makaza and highlighting that the rental unit is 2,000 and there are some amenities like your hot water and electric meter, while a tenant also expresses that they also prefer to stay in Este River, and this is the budget that they have, 3,000 to 3.5. And as you can see below, then the landlord would say, okay, I have a place in Mfuleni and this is my offer. So just then taking the data from the group, just to use it for us to also better understand the sector. I think the slide is just highlighting what we do. So first we do quarterly analytics report. This is where we collect data quarterly. And I think something that is very important to highlight here is that we don't use personal data, but it's more of like aggregating that data at like a neighborhood level, where it will showcase that there are amenities within Khayelitsha that people are offering, would be like your electric meter, hot water, and a finished property, and there's some bit of Wi-Fi. And then also some would say, I prefer like maybe parking, public transport. So those are the things that we draw out from the data itself. And just to highlight that the map, there's also just showing some of the insights or findings that one would get from the data itself. Like for example, in Khayelitsha at the moment there, you see in that quarter that the rental prices on average were 3,000. And I think people who are familiar with Cape Town, one would have assumed that an area like Langa would have like a higher rental because it's next to the CBD, but that's actually not the case, because then one needs to zoom into like understanding why Khayelitsha has those high rental amounts. And I think you'll find things around like the sizes of the property apps, that they're bigger, and you might find they are more spacious rental units. So those are just the learnings that one can draw from the data itself. And then I've highlighted that we do the analytics report, and also there's a dashboard that we also created so that also individuals can interact with the data itself. This is where, again, the data highlights the demand and supply side, being your landlords, how they offer the rental amounts in the different locations, the amenities that are present, what would be the rental amount, similar with the tenant saying, this is the budget that I have in which area that I prefer, and also what I would prefer maybe to be like 5 minutes away from your shopping complexes. So this is just what one would see on the dashboard itself. And I think this also helps and like gives people that platform to also just draw data for themselves and not as highlighting the data in the analytics report. And I think just to highlight some of the challenges and potentials in terms of using this work for decision making, I think we're highlighting there's a need for like collaboration when it comes to this work. I think we're highlighting this work as an NGO, but there's also other work that is happening from government, for example, your spatial planning, your infrastructure departments, they have some form of data themselves. There's also your financial institutions that also like fund this rental units. So they also have like data. And then there's also communities themselves, your real estate agents that I spoke about previously. So I think there's a need for us to like break all the silos, but to work together and create even an open software where everyone can be able to interact with the different variables of data. And then also highlighting the need for capacity building. I think this is very important so that the data that communities have, they can also like understand it and be able to interpret the data themselves, so they can make informed decisions around which location might be better for them to stay. And then just to highlight a key learning here, or a challenge that we also have learned, and I think it could be an opportunity to just showcase that. I think with the page itself, we also have struggles sometimes to just determine if whether a person was successful from using the page itself, because there's some transactions that happen outside of Facebook. And lastly, the issue around language, I think, can play a very important role in a way reducing the sample size, but again, it can highlight an opportunity to have an app. Yeah, I think this is my last slide. I see you, Kayla. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to our presentation. I think this work is just highlighting the the impact of the lives of those individuals that are seeking for accommodation and those who are actually offering shelter in this crisis of Cape Town. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamo, and for sticking to your time so well. I think you've shared a very different idea of what data can be, of how to access data, kind of reiterating that data is all around us. And it's not just about these mainstream methods such as surveys or statistics, but that we can even be using social media platforms to get really important insights into a sector that's hugely underrepresented, that of the informal housing market. And if I'm correct, I think the Facebook page started as a way to link people together, and then you quickly realize that there was really important data, and then you generated your platform where you were able to visualize that data and begin to aggregate it to show the kind of economic, spatial dimensions of that housing sector. So really, really exciting work. And I see your colleague Uma from DAG is also here. So yeah, congratulations to the both of you, and thank you for joining us. We will now head to our final speaker, Daniel Githira. Welcome. Daniel is a data analyst at UN Habitat, and he's currently working with over 50 cities from across the world on localizing the SDG implementation. We're very honored to have you here, and I see you're also ready to go. So please take it away, Daniel. Thank you. Okay, Daniel, we see your slides moving, so that's a wonderful first step, but you are still on mute.
Apologies for that.
Wonderful, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kayla. Yes, I'm also going to talk about the value of data for sustainable development. So thank you for inviting us to the festival. So as a way of introduction, I'll start by saying that I work for the data and analytics section of the UN Habitat, where we are the focal points for the urbanization data within the SDGs and the new urban agenda. So part of our role is to oversee data production, capacity development, and also report production for SDGs and the new urban agenda. So we have a huge responsibility in terms of management of data. We are dealing with the urban statistics, developing methodologies for cities and countries, looking at the indicator framework, how we can use the indicators to look at the city performances, the tools, developing the tools for data processing, data management. Also, for example, application of the tools like the Urban Observatory. We're also responsible for capacity development of cities, making sure they have the right skills, they have the right tools and the right approaches to generate data. Sharing best practices, as well as looking at the emerging technologies. And I'm going to mention a few of them and exactly what we do in terms of making sure that we fill these gaps in terms of making sure that cities make value of the data they generate for decision making and also for SDG reporting. Yeah, so in terms of the context for urban data, we work within the context of SDG framework. So we have the goal 11 that is dedicated to sustainable cities and communities. And then we also have the new urban agenda, which also looks at the localization and also how we can look at the spatial components of data. But if you look at goal 11, then you also realize that it is interconnected with all the other goals. So as the professor in the beginning mentioned, we have this poly crisis where everything is connected. So how do we deal then with cities that have got different priorities competing? So part of the tools that we develop, that we use for cities are tools for urban monitoring. And one of the key tools we have is the urban monitoring framework. So this is a framework that was recently endorsed by the Statistical Commission for implementation. And it looks at how cities can look at the wholesome situation of urban performance, looking at different domains of urban performance, different city objectives, and then using data to look at the domains which are performing better, which are performing poorly, and then looking at their targets. So after developing the baseline data, they look at the targets and then try to look at the distance between the targets and also where they are. So the baseline and the target, and then the priorities can start emerging. So this is one of the key tools we support cities with in terms of prioritization of action, because you can realize, you're going to realize that if you don't look at the city in a wholesome sense, then some sectors are going to be neglected, and this is a very useful tool. So currently we have this tool being implemented in quite a number of cities. And so many cities are taking up the implementation. And I can show you with this example of Rwanda here, where we had the implementation in Kigali, and the results could show that, for example, the environment domain was performing better than the economy domain. And then you can also look at the specific performances of each of the indicators. So this is based on the data scaling. So all the data fall on the same scale. And then if you look at the environment domain, then you can also realize that the budget on climate action, for example, is performing poorly. So we also have the implementation in La Paz, where you look at the resilient component of the urban sustainability falling behind. So this is a very key tool that we support, and we are currently working with the Isavikelane to see how this can be implemented in Isavikelane. So another tool I want to mention that is very key is the one that was presented by Naidoo. This is the GCRO. He talked about the urban observatory model. So in a broader sense, this brings together stakeholders to work on data management, looking at how data can be managed for a city, making sure that the partners, not everyone is not working in silos, and everything can come together, the synergies to generate the data, and also make sure that the data connects to action. So data can go into research, data can go into decision making, and the cities are able to utilize the data in a continuous sense, but also inform reporting, for example, the voluntary local review, where cities are able to report their performances against the targets. And without data, cities are not able to know where they are. So they almost work blindly, not knowing that these are the priority areas, these are the targets towards 2030. So the data is a key component today to measure as an input to sustainability. And at UN Habitat, we're providing the technical support, we're sharing experiences, bringing the network together within the GO network, facilitating partnership, and also certifying observatories, which meets the criteria for certification and connecting to the network. And then another component that is very key is the application of geospatial data, and also looking at the geospatial data for decision making. So if you look at data today, it's not enough to say that our city is performing poorly in terms of transport. There's need to ask ourselves, where exactly do we need to put intervention? So in terms of spatial intervention, looking at the data resolution, also looking at the spatial data, this is a very key component. We are supporting cities to generate data. So we have data for almost 1,000 cities that we generate in-house, and then we share with the cities to work with. So they validate the data, they use it for decision making, but also report their performance against the SDG indicators. We have, like, for example, these 3 indicators: indicator 11.3.1, which looks at sustainable urbanization, where the city is expanding, and the intervention then which can be connected with this expansion, then access to public open spaces, and then also looking at the public transport. Yeah, and this can be cascaded further, where, for example, you can look at vulnerability mapping with the presentation on informal settlements. So this kind of data you collect from the field can be used very much in understanding even inequalities within settlements. For example, even within one settlement, it's not enough to say this is an informal area, but we know some areas within the informal areas are more disadvantaged than the others. And we develop this kind of tools, for example, within the UN Habitat flagship program called the SDG Cities. So this involves collection of data on quite a number of indicators, mostly guided by the urban monitoring framework, and identifying the gaps which exist within the implementation, and then trying to make sure that the cities connect to these priorities and they're able to implement. And you can see this an example of implementation during COVID. We worked with some cases in Sudan, Uganda, and also Kenya. Yeah, so again, you can also overlay these data layers. For example, we think about the urban heat island. We realize that, as the presenter mentioned, that some areas even within the city have got this disadvantage. So if you can overlay, you can stack these data layers, look at access to services, look at the urban heat island, look at disaster components, then we support cities to overlay this data and identify areas which are priorities, which are at risk, and then this is also fed into the decision making of the city. And one of the other tools I feel important to mention is that if you look at the city, for example, the city of Cape Town, development is happening even outside the city. So where you have your city boundaries, you have development happening outside, but you might also have some areas within your city which have rural characteristics. So it becomes very challenging to understand what a city is, because every city is defined by the administrative boundaries. And this is where we are promoting this tool with JRC called the degree of urbanization, where you define the city in a harmonized way that every country can be able to apply this tool and understand what is happening within the city. And this harmonizes reporting of SDGs, where the statistics generated for Cape Town and Johannesburg can be compared because they're based on the same metric. And this has been very useful, looking at the degree of urbanization of the urban areas. And almost to the end, we bring all this together, for example, within to provide resources that can be used by urban areas, also by actors, by researchers. And we have an Earth observation toolkit that brings together a lot of data on Earth observation and a bit of analysis, cloud computing on how you can work through data processing to make sure that you generate information that can be very useful for the city. And we have an urban indicator database where we bring this data together so that anyone who needs this kind of data can access. And we also have other tools, for example, the job processing tools that we develop for the cities, and we make sure that we are in touch with the NSOs, the National Statistical Offices, to also build their capacities to expand their knowledge and also understanding so they can increase their SDG reporting and monitoring. Yeah, so I'm going to stop there because I know we're also out of time. And thank you so much, Kayla, and everyone present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I think your presentation just ties everything together so nicely by showing us the extremely complex job that you have of taking very localized geospatial data and translating it for use at the global level of indicator tracking. So thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor. I'm now going to hand over for a final reflection. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for a Q&A, but I'm really glad to see questions coming through on the chat, and thank you to those panelists who have responded. I would also encourage all the panelists to put their email address into the chat. I won't do it for you, but if you could do it, that would be wonderful, so that participants can get in touch if they want to connect and take any of this, of these tools forward for their own work. So I'm now going to hand over just for a final reflection from Monyake, who is the Director of International Relations at the Department of Human Settlements, and who I know is a big fan and support of different kinds of data for human settlements.
Thank you so much, Kayla. I could have continued for days on this particular session. It was really insightful, and I feel almost as if it was only a little teaser of what is possible, and we could definitely organize another session on this. I was struck by how different types of data are useful for different types of work. So some of the data is useful for me as a resident of a city or neighborhood in order to be able to complain about lack of services, in order to draw attention to a problem, in order to understand whether other neighborhoods or people in my neighborhood share a similar challenge also for city officials, useful tools to understand where the lack of service delivery is located. So instead of making general comments or general statements or general resource allocations across the board, this type of data collection that was presented here today allows officials to be very specific about fixing that tap in that particular street, because Asivikelane allows that level of data to be collected, while at the same time the sort of macro-spatial geospatial data allows us to have a very good sense of how the city works in terms of what we're analyzing for. So you could look at how services are located across the urban domain of a city, how many schools, how many kindergartens, how many health facilities are there, and where are they concentrated, and in order to be able to make the kind of decisions we need to make in order to overcome the South African problem of inequality. The spatial dimension thereof can be so clearly demonstrated through the work that the city urban observatories do, that was showcased. I like the idea of the, bringing the buyer and the seller or the renter and the landlords into proximity in the way that was highlighted by the Development Action Group, way that for both it's a very useful tool to understand their markets better. So instead of moving from instinct and from experience, we now have the added benefit of really working from very rich research that was based on data collection using social media. Very innovative approach. From my side, from the Department of Human Settlements, dealing specifically on the international relations side of things, the usability of each of these types of data for example, showing how we're implementing the new urban agenda in South Africa is going to be key. And the reporting on the new urban agenda is not only for us to be able to tell the world how we're doing, but I think even more importantly, it is to benchmark ourselves against what we have committed to doing, but taking different types of data into account. So we have to move from the census level data to the household survey data to the data that is being collected by the cities and demanded by government, but also into the anecdotal and the storytelling type of data that show and inspire and advocate for the type of sustainable human settlements that we are imagining. And so I found each presentation to have been extraordinarily valuable in demonstrating that. And I know we're over time, so I'm going to pause here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you to everyone for staying with us, and of course to our panelists for providing that very rich overview of just, what data is there. And I hope we have all been inspired by seeing the combination and the variation that exists. And Monica, I completely agree. We do need another session on this, and you and I can chat offline about this. I think we need to show city practitioners just how much is available to them, and question them as to whether they think they are using this data sufficiently, because it's there for the taking, and it needs to be taken, and it needs to be informing decision making at a very high level. So with that, we can head back to plenary. And in order to do that, you're going to click leave room at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Try not to leave the entire meeting, just leave the room, and then that will take us back to plenary, where we have a very exciting virtual exhibition planned next in the agenda, which will then take us into the closing of the Urban Festival. Thank you so much, colleagues, and we will be engaging again.